Use headphones for better experience. Welcome to Silent Conduit. This channel explores the hidden, lesser-known corners of the internet, what we refer to as the dark web. All content here is for informational and entertainment purposes only. We do not endorse or encourage any illegal activities, and viewers should exercise caution if exploring these topics independently. Stay safe, stay informed, and let's dive in. Also, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe.
College was supposed to be my escape, a new start away from the suffocating weight of home. Growing up in a small town where dreams withered as quickly as they were born, I had one ambition: to leave. My family, though, had other plans for me. My parents, Nancy and Greg, weren't bad people. They weren't neglectful or abusive in any traditional sense. They were just absent, locked in their own cycles of bitterness and regret. My dad was a contractor who spent more time nursing beers on the porch than he did at home. My mom, perpetually drained from her thankless job at a diner, tried to keep the family stitched together. But their fights were like clockwork, loud, venomous arguments that usually ended with one of them slamming a door. As a kid, I used to count the seconds until the screaming stopped. It became a ritual, like a twisted bedtime story. When they finally divorced during my senior year of high school, it wasn't a surprise. What shocked me was how quickly they both moved on. My mom left for another state with her new boyfriend, and my dad buried himself in work and whiskey. They barely looked back, leaving me to fend for myself. I'd always been the quiet kid, the one who sat at the back of the class, doodling in his notebook or messing around on his laptop. My teachers called me gifted, but it wasn't intelligence that set me apart, it was curiosity. I was obsessed with computers. I loved how clean and logical they were, how problems could be solved with the right sequence of code. Unlike my family, a computer wouldn't scream at you or leave you. It became my refuge. College seemed like the light at the end of the tunnel. I earned a partial scholarship to study computer science, packed what little I had, and left home without a second glance. But reality hit hard. College wasn't the grand adventure I'd imagined. Instead, it was a relentless grind, and my depression, something I'd been able to keep at bay in high school, came rushing back. The first semester was tolerable. I even made a couple of friends, including Mark, a sophomore who shared my interest in gaming and had a knack for finding weed. But by the second semester, the cracks started to show. I couldn't keep up with the workload. I stopped calling my mom, even though I missed her more than I'd ever admit. I'd think about her sometimes, wondering if she even thought about me, or if her new life had erased me completely. My dad was no better. He'd occasionally send me a text, usually a one-liner like, "Hope you're doing okay." But even those stopped after a while. I'd stare at my phone, debating whether to reach out, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. What was the point? We were strangers now. I threw myself into my classes, hoping that success would fill the void. But when that didn't work, I turned to weed. Mark was my enabler, though I didn't blame him. He was dealing with his own shit, a broken home, bad grades, and a habit of using humor to deflect. We became each other's lifeline, even if our bond was built more on mutual self-destruction than anything healthy. The first time Mark introduced me to weed, I didn't hesitate. It wasn't peer pressure, I was already looking for something to drown the noise in my head. The sharp ache of loneliness, the unrelenting pressure to perform in classes I didn't even enjoy, the hollow feeling of being forgotten by my parents, it all felt like weights tied to my ankles, pulling me under. I'll never forget that first hit. We were in Mark's dorm, a cluttered room that smelled perpetually of cheap cologne and old pizza. He passed me the joint with an easy grin, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I remember coughing so hard my eyes watered, and Mark laughing until he cried. But a few minutes later, I felt it, a warm haze washing over me, dulling the edges of everything sharp. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't thinking about my parents, or my ex, or the growing pile of assignments I couldn't bring myself to start. I was just floating. It didn't take long for weed to become a regular part of my life. It wasn't enough to fix anything, but it numbed the pain just enough to make it bearable. Mark became my go-to guy, not just for weed but for companionship. He was the kind of person who could make you laugh even when you were drowning, and I clung to that like a lifeline. We spent countless nights getting high, playing video games, and talking about everything and nothing. He was the first person I ever told about my parents, about how my dad's last words to me were, "Don't screw this up, kid," and how my mom hadn't even bothered to call on my birthday. Mark understood in a way no one else did. His own family was just as broken, an alcoholic dad who'd been in and out of jail, a mom who worked 2 jobs and barely had time for him. We joked about starting a club for kids with messed up parents. But beneath the humor, there was a shared pain that neither of us wanted to admit. It was during one of those late-night hangouts that Mark brought up the dark web for the first time. I'd heard of it before, of course. Half my professors had warned us about it during our cybersecurity courses. But Mark made it sound almost fun. He described it as a digital Wild West, a place where you could find anything if you knew where to look. Drugs, counterfeit money, weapons, it was all there, waiting to be discovered. At first, I was skeptical. The dark web seemed like something out of a movie, not something real people actually used. But the more Mark talked about it, the more curious I became. He told me how easy it was to access, how all you needed was the Tor browser and a little bit of Bitcoin. "Come on," he said one night, passing me the joint. "You're the computer guy. If anyone could figure it out, it's you." That was all the encouragement I needed. The next day, I downloaded Tor and started exploring. At first, it was just a novelty, scrolling through forums, checking out marketplaces. Most of it was harmless enough, or at least as harmless as illegal drug trades could be. I even ordered some MDMA once, just to see if it would actually arrive. It did, neatly packaged in a small, unmarked envelope. The whole process was so seamless it was almost scary. But the more time I spent on the dark web, the more I realized how deep the rabbit hole went. There were forums dedicated to hacking, to scamming, to creating viruses that could cripple entire systems. There were chat rooms where people traded secrets, shared conspiracy theories, and told stories that felt too twisted to be real. And then there were the darker corners, the places where morality went to die. Red rooms. Hitman services. Live-streamed torture. I'd read about them in articles, but seeing them listed on actual websites was something else entirely. Most of the links were dead ends, leading to error pages or blank screens. But every now and then, I'd stumble on something that made my stomach churn. I couldn't stop. It wasn't just morbid curiosity, it was a distraction, a way to keep myself from thinking about everything else. I told myself it was harmless, that I was just looking, not participating. But deep down, I knew I was playing with fire. It was almost 2 a.m. when I found it. My room was lit only by the soft glow of my monitor, and the hum of my laptop was the only sound, save for the occasional passing car outside my window. I had been browsing aimlessly through dark web forums for hours, skimming posts about illicit trades and shadowy services. My eyes burned from the strain, but I couldn't bring myself to stop. That's when I saw the post. It was buried deep within a thread titled, "Verified Services, No Scams Allowed." Most of the replies were for drug vendors or counterfeit IDs, but one caught my attention immediately, Slayer's assassination and life-ruining services. The bold, almost gleeful tone of the title sent a shiver down my spine. There was no description, just a string of characters, clearly a link to a .onion site. I hesitated for a moment, my cursor hovering over the link. My rational brain screamed at me to close the browser and go to bed, but something else, something darker, kept me there. I clicked. The site loaded slowly, the screen filling with black before white text appeared. Across the top, in bold letters, was the name, Slayer's Assassination and Life-Ruining Services. Beneath it was an image of a skull inside a crosshair, and next to that, a tagline, "When life isn't worth living, let us fix it, for you or someone else." It was absurd. I almost laughed. This couldn't be real. But as I scrolled down, the absurdity gave way to unease. There was a menu of services, each with a description and a price tag: acid attack 3,000 blinding, 5,000 castration, 7,000 torture sessions, 10,000 basic assassination, 20,000. The list went on, each entry more grotesque than the last. And beside every option was a cheerful "Place Order" button. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. For a moment, I thought about closing the tab and forgetting I'd ever stumbled across this nightmare. But then, like a whisper in the back of my mind, a thought emerged: what if this is real? I'd been spiraling for months, teetering on the edge of something I couldn't name. The isolation, the numbness, the constant feeling of being an afterthought in everyone's life, it had all built to a crescendo. What if I could put an end to it? The idea wasn't new. I'd thought about ending things before. But I'd always been too scared to go through with it, too unsure of how to do it without turning it into another failure. This was different. It was clean. Simple. Someone else would do it for me. I don't remember making the decision. One moment, I was staring at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. The next, I was filling out the order form. Name. Address. Photo. Each field felt like a small surrender, a piece of myself handed over to the void. When it came to the method of execution, I chose the most basic option: assassination. I couldn't afford anything else, and the idea of being tortured or mutilated made my stomach churn. The final step was payment. The site accepted only Bitcoin, of course. Mark had shown me how to set up a wallet months ago, and I'd used it to buy drugs a few times. I transferred the equivalent of $15,000 from my savings, money I'd been hoarding for the faint hope of a better future. When I clicked Submit Order, a confirmation message appeared: "Thank you for your purchase. Your Hitman has been dispatched. Expect them within 72 hours." The next morning, I woke up with a crushing sense of regret. At first, I thought it was just another bad dream. But when I saw my laptop still open to the confirmation email, reality hit me like a freight train. My pulse quickened, my chest tightening as I stared at the screen. What had I done? The rational part of me tried to calm the panic. It was probably fake, a scam designed to prey on desperate idiots like me. But then I thought about the Bitcoin. There was no refunding that. And if it was real, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every sound outside my apartment, every car engine, every footstep, made my skin crawl. By afternoon, I was a nervous wreck, jumping at shadows and pacing the small confines of my living room. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a car pulled up across the street. It was a black sedan with tinted windows, the kind you'd see in crime movies. It parked directly opposite my apartment and didn't move. I told myself it was a coincidence. Someone visiting a neighbor. But hours passed, and the car remained. The driver didn't get out. My phone buzzed. It was a text message from an unknown number: 72 hours starts now. Be ready. My stomach dropped. I stared at the message, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. This wasn't a scam. This wasn't a joke. Someone was coming for me. By the time darkness swallowed the sky, I was a man unraveling at the seams. The black sedan hadn't moved in hours, its presence oppressive and maddening. My apartment, once my refuge, now felt like a cage. Every creak of the floorboards or whisper of wind outside sent a jolt through me, my mind racing to conjure scenarios worse than the last. The text message haunted me, 72 hours starts now. Be ready. I stared at it repeatedly, hoping I'd hallucinated it. But there it was, plain as day, a digital countdown to my demise. I had no one to turn to. The idea of calling the police briefly crossed my mind, but what could I possibly say? Hi, I paid a hitman to kill me and now I think they're outside. No, that would end with me in a psych ward, or worse, the hitman hearing about it and striking early. Mark. He was the only person who might understand. I dialed his number, my hands trembling so violently that it took 3 tries to hit the right buttons. The phone rang once. Twice. On the 3rd ring, his groggy voice answered, "What's up?" "It's late." I hesitated, unsure of how to even begin. "Mark," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I think I screwed up. Like, really bad." There was a long pause. "What are you talking about? You remember last night? That hitman site we found?" A laugh burst through the receiver. "Oh man, I do. That was hilarious. What about it?" I ordered one. On myself." The laughter stopped immediately. "What the hell are you talking about?" I wasn't thinking, I blurted out. I was high, and it felt like a joke. "But it's not a joke, Mark. I think it's real." For a moment, all I could hear was his breathing. "Alright, you're freaking me out. What makes you think it's real?" "There's a car outside my place. A black sedan. It's just sitting there, and I got this text, 72 hours starts now." "You're probably just paranoid," Mark said, though his voice wavered. "That site was bullshit. There's no way it's real." "Then why would they send me a confirmation email? Why would someone text me?" Mark sighed heavily. "Okay, look. Just lock your doors, stay inside, and wait it out. I'll come over tomorrow and check it out." "You're probably just..." A loud bang at my front door cut him off. I froze, the phone slipping from my grasp. The sound wasn't a knock. It was forceful, deliberate, like someone testing the strength of the frame. "Hello." Mark's voice came faintly from the phone on the floor. The banging came again, louder this time. I scrambled for the phone, clutching it tightly. "Mark, someone's here." "What? Who? Did you see them?" "I don't know." Another bang, followed by the sound of splintering wood. My front door was giving way. "Hide," Mark said through the phone. "Get somewhere safe and call the cops. Right now." I didn't have time to respond. My survival instincts took over, and I bolted for the bedroom, slamming the door shut and locking it behind me. I slid under the bed, my heart hammering so hard it felt like it might burst. The apartment fell silent. I held my breath, straining to hear anything over the deafening thud of my heartbeat. A minute passed. Then 2. The stillness was almost worse than the noise. Finally, I heard it, slow, deliberate footsteps. They were inside. Whoever they were, they didn't rush. They moved with the careful precision of a predator stalking its prey. The sound of drawers being opened and furniture being moved echoed through the apartment. I gripped my phone tightly, my finger hovering over the emergency call button. But I didn't press it. What if the sound gave me away? What if the cops couldn't get here in time? The footsteps grew closer, moving down the hall toward my bedroom. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying to a God I hadn't believed in since I was a child. The door handle jiggled, then stopped. I realized with sickening clarity that I had forgotten something, the small window above my bed. It was cracked open. A faint rustling sound confirmed my worst fear. They were climbing through. The bedroom filled with the sound of boots hitting the floor. I held my breath, every muscle in my body tense as a steel wire. Through the tiny gap between the bed frame and the floor, I saw them. A figure dressed entirely in black, their face hidden behind a blank white mask. The mask was featureless except for two dark holes where the eyes should be. They stood there for a moment, their head tilting slightly as if listening for something. Then, slowly, they crouched down, their head dipping toward the floor. Our eyes met. I screamed. The figure reached for me, their gloved hand darting under the bed. I rolled away instinctively, scrambling out the other side and grabbing the heavy lamp from my nightstand. Without thinking, I swung it with all my strength. The lamp shattered against their shoulder, sending shards of glass flying. They staggered slightly but didn't fall. Instead, they straightened up, their head tilting again in that eerie, almost curious way. I didn't wait for them to recover. I bolted for the door, throwing it open and sprinting down the hallway. Behind me, I heard the sound of boots pounding against the floor as they gave chase. I reached the kitchen and grabbed the largest knife I could find. When I turned, they were already there, standing in the doorway, motionless. For a moment, neither of us moved. "Stay back," I whispered, holding the knife in front of me. My hands trembled so badly the blade wobbled in the air. The figure didn't respond. They took a step forward, then another. I panicked. Lunging forward, I slashed wildly at the space between us. The knife connected, slicing through fabric and flesh. Blood, dark and thick, spattered onto the tile floor. The figure let out a low, guttural sound, almost like a growl. They stumbled back, one hand clutching their side. For a brief, fleeting moment, I thought I had one. Then they straightened up, pulling a gleaming blade from their belt. Before they could move, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. Red and blue lights flickered through the kitchen window, casting strange shadows across the walls. The figure froze. For a moment, they simply stood there, staring at me. Then, without a word, they turned and bolted out the back door. I collapsed to the floor, the knife slipping from my grasp as the adrenaline drained from my body. The police arrived minutes later. They found me huddled in the kitchen, blood on my hands and terror in my eyes. I tried to explain, but the words wouldn't come. It wasn't until hours later, after the police had secured the scene and taken my statement, that I realized something chilling. The hitman hadn't come to kill me. They'd come to test me. The confirmation email. The text message. The car. It had all been a setup, a psychological game designed to break me before the real thing. And I had played right into their hands. The morning light seeped through my kitchen window, but it brought no comfort. My apartment was a disaster, overturned furniture, shattered glass, blood smeared on the floor where the masked figure had stood. The police had left hours ago, promising to investigate the break-in, though I didn't tell them everything. I couldn't. How could I explain that the intruder wasn't just a random home invader? That I had paid them to come here? The truth felt as surreal as the events of the night before, and yet the evidence was all around me, a knife stained with someone else's blood, my front door barely hanging on its hinges, and the lingering chill of knowing they'd been inside my home. I hadn't slept. Every noise, every groan of the building, every creak of the floorboards, sent me into a frenzy. My heart would pound as if the figure had returned, standing silently in the shadows, waiting to finish what they'd started. I tried to tell myself it was over. The hitman had fled when the cops arrived. The danger was gone. But deep down, I knew better. They weren't done with me. By noon, I was staring blankly at my laptop screen. I couldn't bring myself to log back into the dark web. The site where I'd placed the order felt like a portal to something unspeakable, and even the thought of opening it made my skin crawl. Instead, I sat there refreshing my inbox, waiting for something. I didn't know what I expected. An email? A message? Some kind of follow-up from the masked intruder? And then, it came. A notification pinged on my screen. My stomach sank as I opened the email. Subject, next steps. Body, congratulations. You've survived the first stage. Most don't. But this isn't over. The 72-hour timer still stands. We will be in touch. There was no signature, no name. Just those 3 lines. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. The first stage? What did that mean? Was this some kind of sick initiation? And what did they mean by next steps? I sat frozen in my chair, my mind racing. The police hadn't scared them off. They'd planned for this. The hitman, whoever they were, wasn't just some random thug. They were part of something bigger, something calculated. I thought about calling Mark, but what could I say? I'd already dragged him into this mess, and I didn't want to put him in more danger. Instead, I locked every door and window, pulled all the blinds shut, and armed myself with whatever I could find, a kitchen knife, a crowbar from the closet, even a can of pepper spray I'd bought years ago and never used. I told myself I'd be ready if they came back. But the next attack wasn't physical. It started small. That night, as I sat huddled on the couch, my phone buzzed with another text. We see you. My blood ran cold. I glanced around the room, half expecting to see the masked figure standing in the corner. But the apartment was empty, the silence oppressive. A second text came through moments later, nice shirt. I looked down. I was wearing a plain black hoodie, nothing special. But the implication was clear, they were watching me. Panic set in. I checked every window, peering through the blinds for any sign of movement. The street outside was eerily quiet, the black sedan long gone. But the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. Then my laptop screen flickered. I stared at it in horror as the browser opened on its own, navigating to a live video feed. The screen was black at first, but then an image flickered into view, me, sitting on the couch, staring at the screen. I shot up, spinning around to find the camera. My laptop webcam. I slammed it shut, my breathing ragged. The phone buzzed again, 72 hours is ticking. Tick. Tock. By the second day, I was unraveling. The taunts didn't stop. Every time I turned my phone off, it would turn back on by itself, buzzing relentlessly with cryptic messages. You can't hide. It's almost time. Run. My paranoia reached a fever pitch. I barely ate, barely drank, pacing the apartment like a caged animal. Every shadow seemed to move, every noise felt like a threat. On the morning of the third day, I made the mistake of checking the news. The headline sent a wave of nausea through me, local man found dead in apparent torture killing. The article described a grisly scene, someone tortured and murdered in their own home, the victim's identity withheld pending family notification. The location was only a few miles from my apartment. My mind filled with horrifying possibilities. Was that their first stage for someone else? Had another victim failed the game I was now trapped in? By the evening of the third day, I was barely holding it together. The messages had stopped, replaced by a suffocating silence. I didn't know what was worse, the constant taunts or the waiting. The clock read 11:30 p.m. Only 30 minutes until the 72-hour timer ran out. I clutched the crowbar tightly, my knuckles white as I sat in the corner of my bedroom, staring at the door. And then, it happened. The lights went out. My heart leapt into my throat as the apartment plunged into darkness. I fumbled for my phone, turning on the flashlight and pointing it at the door. The sound of footsteps echoed through the apartment. They weren't trying to be quiet this time. The boots thudded heavily against the floor, each step deliberate and mocking. I stood, gripping the crowbar so tightly my hands ached. The footsteps stopped outside my bedroom door. Silence. Then, the handle turned. The door swung open slowly, revealing the masked figure standing in the doorway. But this time, they weren't alone. Behind them stood two others, their faces obscured by the same blank white masks. I raised the crowbar, ready to fight, but before I could move, the first figure spoke. "Congratulations," they said, their voice distorted and inhuman. "You've passed the test." I froze, the words not registering at first. "The game is over," the figure continued. "You've proven yourself worthy." "Worthy of what?" I stammered, my voice trembling. They tilted their head, as if amused. "Of joining us." It wasn't until later that I understood what they meant. The Hitman service wasn't real, not in the way I'd thought. It wasn't about killing people. It was about recruitment. They preyed on the desperate, the broken, the ones who had nothing left to lose. And if you survived, they owned you. I don't know why I said yes. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the promise of escape from the emptiness that had consumed me for so long. Or maybe, deep down, I knew there was no other choice. The masked figures left my apartment that night, but they didn't disappear. They became a part of my life, pulling me deeper into their world of darkness and manipulation. I became one of them. Joining them wasn't an instant transformation, it was a slow erosion of everything I once thought I was. At first, they gave me tasks that seemed harmless, almost mundane. Decrypting files, finding vulnerabilities in security systems, coding backdoors for systems I didn't dare ask about. It felt like freelancing, just with an undercurrent of menace I couldn't shake. The leader, the one in the mask who had spoken that night, called himself Rook. I don't know if that was his real name or a code name, but it didn't matter. He was the one who controlled everything, the orchestrator of this strange and horrifying network. "We choose people like you," he told me during one of our first meetings, conducted through an encrypted video call. His mask filled the screen, a blank, unreadable face. People who've seen the edge. People who know what it's like to feel powerless. That's what makes you valuable. I didn't feel valuable. I felt like a pawn. My first real job came 2 weeks later. By then, I'd fallen into a numb routine, work on whatever task they gave me, follow their instructions to the letter, and try not to think about the consequences. But this job was different. I received an encrypted email with a single line of text, "We need you to test loyalty." Attached was a folder containing a dossier on a man named Paul Withers, a mid-level executive at a tech firm in the city. There was nothing remarkable about him, at least on the surface. A picture showed a balding, middle-aged man with tired eyes and a polite smile. But the instructions made my stomach churn. Monitor his activity. Find leverage. Make him suffer. I stared at the screen for hours, torn between the impulse to delete everything and the paralyzing fear of what they'd do to me if I refused. By now, I'd seen enough to know they weren't bluffing. So, I started digging. Paul's life was unremarkable, almost painfully so. He worked long hours, rarely socialized, and spent most of his free time watching old movies or tinkering with model trains. But then I found it, an affair. It wasn't flashy, just a series of emails exchanged with a younger woman in his office. But it was enough. I reported my findings back to Rook, hoping that would be the end of it. Instead, I received a new set of instructions: send the emails to Paul's wife. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the send button. But the memory of that night in my apartment, the figure in the mask, the glint of the knife, pushed me forward. I clicked it. The fallout was immediate. Paul's wife left him. His reputation at work was ruined. Within a week, he was gone, fired, humiliated, and forced to sell his house. I didn't know what happened to him after that, and I didn't want to. The worst part of working for them wasn't the jobs themselves, it was the isolation. I couldn't tell anyone what I was involved in, not even Mark. He still stopped by occasionally, bringing weed and cracking jokes, but I could tell he sensed something was wrong. "You've been weird lately," he said one night, passing me a joint. "Like, more paranoid than usual." I forced a laugh. "Just stressed. School stuff. You're not still messing with that dark web crap, are you?" I froze, my stomach twisting. "No. That was just a one-time thing." Mark narrowed his eyes, studying me. "If you say so." I wanted to tell him the truth. I wanted to beg for help. But I knew it wouldn't matter. The moment I tried to escape, they'd come for me, and this time, they wouldn't stop at intimidation. Months passed, each job chipping away at me bit by bit. I stopped going to classes, stopped answering calls from the few friends I had left. Even my parents, estranged as we were, tried to reach out, but I ignored them. I couldn't let them get dragged into this. The breaking point came during my fourth job. This one wasn't about blackmail or surveillance. It was about sabotage. They sent me to a warehouse on the outskirts of town, a crumbling building that reeked of oil and rust. Inside, I found a row of servers, industrial, high-capacity machines humming softly in the dark. The instructions were clear: install the malware. Destroy the evidence. I didn't know who owned the servers or what they were used for, but it didn't matter. I followed their orders, plugging in the USB drive they'd given me and watching as the malware spread like wildfire. When it was done, I reached for the canister of gasoline I'd brought with me. That's when I heard it, a muffled cry from the far end of the warehouse. I froze, the gas can slipping from my grasp. Someone was here. I crept toward the sound, my heart pounding. At first, I thought it was an animal, a dog, maybe. But as I got closer, I realized it was a man. He was tied to a chair, his face bruised and bloody, his mouth gagged. His eyes locked onto mine, wide with terror. I staggered back, my mind racing. This wasn't part of the plan. I wasn't supposed to hurt anyone. But then the phone in my pocket buzzed. A text from Rook: "Finish it." I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the man as he struggled against his bonds. He was trying to say something, but the gag muffled his words. I thought about everything that had led me here, my depression, my loneliness, the night I'd clicked "submit order" on that cursed website. This was my life now. This was what I'd become. And I couldn't take it anymore. I dropped the phone and ran. I don't remember much about the days that followed. I stayed with Mark, lying about why I needed a place to crash. He didn't ask too many questions, but I could tell he was worried. Eventually, the messages stopped. I don't know why. Maybe they decided I wasn't worth the trouble, or maybe they'd moved on to someone else. But the scars they left behind never faded. Even now, years later, I still check over my shoulder. I still keep my blinds shut and my doors locked. I know they're out there, watching, waiting. And one day, they'll come back.